Patrick Norton.
Patrick, will I need to read this public hearing notice in its entirety?
Yes, please.
Okay.
I can do it if you want.
That would be fine.
Sure.
You've got a much more melodious voice than I do.
Well, it's all those voice lessons.
Yeah. It's all that tap dancing you've had to do.
I never saw Patrick tap dance. I'd like to see that.
Well, he's a mean toe tapper.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
And you know that how, Rick?
I've seen him in action.
Oh, geez.
It was probably me falling down. Yes. He'd be a panelist. Yeah. And,
Okay, we almost have a full house. Good evening, Bill.
Good evening.
You're looking marvelous.
He's brown nosing you, Bill. Be careful.
I'll give Emil a couple more minutes and then we'll start if he's unavailable. Why don't we begin? Hopefully Emil will chime in and join us. I know people's time is valuable and want to get started. So on the agenda tonight is the Stormwater Management Special Permit Public Hearing that Patrick will read the announcement for. That's from the Stormwater Management Special Permit application from Summit Real Estate Strategies of Manchester, Mass, related to properties on Bridge Street. And other board business, including upcoming schedule, agenda items, and approval of meeting minutes. We need to bring the meeting to order, so we'll go around and have each person on the board identify themselves and say that they're present. Pat Norton.
Pat Norton here.
Jonathan Poor here.
Corey.
Corey Beaulieu, present.
Bill.
Bill Wheaton, present.
Barney.
Barney Crouch, present.
Richard.
Richard Boroff, present.
And Rick Mitchell, present. Okay, Patrick Reffett, you want to read the notice of hearing?
In accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 40, Section 15C, the Hamilton Planning Board will hold a public hearing February the 15th, 2022 via Zoom with video and call-in options, as will be shown in the February the 15th, 2022 Planning Board agenda, to be published or posted with the clerk and on the town website, meeting statutory requirements. The hearing is to consider an application for a stormwater management special permit application from Summit Real Estate Strategies, LLC of Manchester, Massachusetts, 01944, in accordance with Town of Hamilton Stormwater Management Permit Rules and Regulations as of November the 9th, 2021. General Bylaw, Chapter 29. The proposal is for one lot referred to as Lot 1, which is 1.24 acres, within the overall property referred to as 0 Bridge Street, and is located at the northwest corner of the property presently referred to as Assessor's Map 58, Lot 53. Any person interested in or wishing to be heard should attend the virtual hearing at the time so designated.
Okay, very good. So for the participants who are new to this process, the applicant will make a presentation. We also have had a peer review done by an independent objective civil engineering firm to look at the application and has made comments. And the board will then ask questions and get clarifications and discuss any concerns they might have. And then the public get the opportunity to ask questions or express concerns they may have. So with that, Patrick, I'll turn it over to you to introduce the application and lead us off.
Yeah, just very quickly, again, the property is generally located at the intersection of Bridge Street with, let's see, Miles River Road. It's 1.24 acres. The applicant is Summit Real Estate. John Murphy is president. He's here tonight. Brian Jones from Alan Majors is his engineering assistants, and they've prepared the application before the board. I'll also mention that William Blaze of Weston and Sampson, as well as Tim DiGiuliamo. Sorry for that, Tim. You can pronounce it for me later. But they're both here tonight. They've prepared the peer review of the Allen and Majors application that came to us. I just see John Murphy, who's now on the bottom of my screen, which welcome, gentlemen, and Marnie. So why don't we have either John or Brian present your presentation to us.
And just before we do that, I just want to note that Emil did join us, and he seems to have disappeared again. Oh, there he is. You moved. Emil is now with us.
Good evening.
Okay, good. Sorry to interrupt John or whomever is going to make the applicants.
No problem. Why don't I start? My name is Brian Jones with Allen and Major Associates. We are civil engineers and land surveyors. And we prepared the application and did the design for the single family house. I do have a drawing that probably would be helpful. Can the host enable me to share my screen?
I think that's you.
I need to be given permission to share my screen. There we go. All right. So this is the corner of Miles River Road and Bridge Street. It's a single family house, 5-bedroom. And the stormwater, I think, is pretty straightforward. What we're doing here is it is a sloped site starting at the back. This area is the higher, it's about elevation 90. And then we get down to about elevation 50 in this area. So there is a pretty good grade change across the site front to back. Driveway enters in off Miles River Road. And then you kind of come up into the site. This would be a garage under, and then first floor would be 10 feet higher at about elevation 80. In the front here, we have our septic system. Alan and Major also did the test pits on this property, so we know what the soils are like and have a pretty good feel of the land here. There is a collection system that's going to take any stormwater that comes down the hill, intercept it before it gets into the backyard or towards the septic. And these two shaded areas are vegetated swales. One goes in this direction to a culvert, and then the other swale wraps around the site in this direction. And then they're all collected basically at the corner of Miles River Road and Bridge Street. This is our primary stormwater management facility. It's a bioretention area with a proprietary media, and that does a couple things. One, it provides some detention to accommodate for the added impervious area that reduces the peak rate of runoff to the historic rate so that there's no increase in rate of runoff. And then there's a biofiltration system here in the bottom. The product is called Focal Point, but it's a proprietary media that provides TSS removal, which is total suspended solids. And then your bylaw also has a phosphorus reduction requirement, and the Focal Point also provides a reduction in phosphorus. And then once it's treated, it's outletted through a control structure here, and then we connect to an existing catch basin that's actually inside the property. There's a second catch basin off the property, and then the culvert continues on its way sort of to the northwest where it enters an offsite wetland area. That's it in a nutshell. It is, as I mentioned, a single family house, 1.25 acres, probably have about 5,000 square feet of impervious area. So just about 10%. And we're here for any questions. Thank you.
Okay, so Patrick, should we hear from our peer review?
Let me just make a couple of comments first. As we'll discuss later in the meeting, we'd like to look at things in a composite view. Maybe I should have mentioned this earlier, but this lot is part of the 9 individual A&Rs that got created. That was part of the former Gordon Conwell Theologic Seminary property. Again, this is at the tip of the property on the northwest corner. The application before the board tonight is for this one specific lot. We've received the application. I've emailed that around to folks. 1 or 2 of you have a hard copy of it. Our folks at Weston and Sampson have done the in-depth granular review of it as well. And I know that they found a number of points that they'd like to have the applicant readdress, but I wanted to give a bit of an overview of how we're looking at things. I can tell you that, this one lot out of the 9 lots that are all contiguous, there's a real desire from the residents across Bridge Street, that all of the properties work in a connected way to address drainage. And again, we'll talk about that later, but we want to focus on this individual application first, and then we can go to the bigger topic later. So, William, do you want to make your review comments or report?
Yeah, so can I assume that all the board members and the engineering team got a copy of the comments pre-meeting?
Yes.
Yes.
John has gotten it and Brian also?
Yes.
Okay. Is this something you want me to pull up on the screen, you think, or you just want to go through some items?
I think it would be helpful if you go through it item by item. You can summarize your findings, but probably just because the public doesn't know what the document is, and actually, if you want to pull it up as you walk through it, that would be helpful as well.
Okay. I need permission to share my screen?
Okay.
Do we have it?
I don't know who's in control of the sharing, but
I believe we're looking at your screen. Yep.
You have my
okay,
screen?
there we
Okay.
go.
Okay. So the major components of the review focused around the drainage report that we were provided and the stormwater management plan set. Those are two items. The drainage report was significant volume, 148 or 50 pages. And the plan set included three plans.
Bill, can you speak up?
Yes. Yeah, so we looked at the drainage report itself and the stormwater plan set. And we were reviewing the applicant's submittal in regards to the stormwater system only, in regards to compliance with Massachusetts stormwater standards and the town of Hamilton stormwater rules and regulations. So I'll just go through some items one by one and give you a summary of, I guess we can talk about things that need to be addressed as opposed to things that seem to be okay. Like standard one seems to be okay, so I'm not sure we need to talk too much about that. I guess one thing I would say about that is, I have a note here, is if the applicant can provide velocity calcs for the two drainage swales. I think they provided some calcs and velocity calcs for the riprap area. A review of velocity calcs for the two swales that go on either side of the property would be valuable in determining any sediment or erosion that would be going on prior to entering the bioretention area. So standard 2 is a peak attenuation stormwater standard. It states, the post-development discharges do not exceed the pre-development discharges. In theory, they provided documentation saying that they have met that standard by the total flows post being less than total flows pre-existing. I do have some questions on the drainage area that they've established for the study area that goes to SP1, the study point, which is the catch basin down at the on the northwest corner of the property. It just appears to be a little bit incorrect as far as being undersized a little bit, and maybe a resubmittal of that or discussion between myself and the engineering team on their thoughts of what was done. We did look at some of the HydroCAD routing HydroCAD flow generations. It was a preliminary deep look into the HydroCAD routing aspect of the drainage system. I do have some questions for the engineering team on some of the proposed subcatchments that they laid out and where they actually flow to. That is something we can have as a discussion to iron out any questions I may have or concerns. Again, that kind of goes in line with, the drainage study area and subcatchments that they developed. So currently, they presented that information as being acceptable and meets the standard. I just need some fine tuning and some discussions or clarifications on that, and maybe a reevaluation if they agree that there should be some adjustments to the drainage area. Standard 3 was the recharge to groundwater. So the loss of annual recharge to the groundwater shall be eliminated or minimized through the use of infiltration measures. The proponents documented that the groundwater tables with 18 inches of the ground surface, and the site is not a candidate for infiltration because of that reason. Mass DEP guidelines, does recognize that some lots may not be able to infiltrate for soil conditions, usually because of the soil types being C or D, and it does not identify that a groundwater limitation is a reason for not infiltrating, but directly. So normally what would happen is that is something that they could get a waiver for when they went in front of the governing board that is proving their permit by stating the case that a groundwater limitation is comparable to a C or D soil limitation. So that's something that could be worked out during the review process from the governing commission here. And standard 4 is this water quality standard to remove 80% of the TSS, and the town regulations require 90% TSS removal. I'm looking for a resubmittal here for the following reasons. I looked at the mass sites, and I've interpreted that this area this property is located within an ACEC, area of critical environmental concern, because of a interim well protection area. So with that classification that I've identified, the required water quality volume needs to be updated to be 1 inch of runoff times the impervious area, as opposed to the ½ inch that they've done. And a pre-treatment of 40% TSS removal would be required for the bioretention unit. And also I would like to see it provide the applicant to provide the TSS worksheet on a treatment train going forward on that. Again, this is a discussion that we can have between myself and the engineering team, and I can show them how I've determined that. This is an ACEC area, and they can discuss it with me. The potential for a 4-bay, sediment 4-bay, and maybe deep sub catch basins would be something that they could put in to achieve the pre-treatment of the 44% prior to entering the bioretention area. As far as the bioretention system itself, there was a significant amount of information provided for that. Literature, documentation of, why they think it's 90%, it achieves 90% removal. It was a lot of information. One thing I did gather from it, and they presented was, this unit itself is not listed in the Mass DEP regs and does not give a approved TSS removal value. So, that's something that would need to be worked out. They did provide a significant amount of information, but it was a lot to go to. And I think if we could streamline that to confirm that it does achieve 90% and 65% on the phosphorus removal, that's something that we could talk about and work through ourselves, I guess. Because some of the information they did provide did document other communities that have approved the focal point system, and they've only approved it for 80% removal and 50% phosphorus. So I guess maybe more detailed or clearer information on where they're coming up with a 90% number. Okay, land uses with higher potential pollutant loads. This property does not exist in that area, so that's a good thing. Again, this goes back to the area of critical environmental concern. I'm just asking that the applicant should confirm that the proposed development site is not within an IWPA, as I have found on the Mass Mapper site website. If it's determined that it is, adjustments need to be made to the calculations for the required water quality volume, and then the pre-treatment of 44% TSS removal. The project itself is classified as new development, and therefore it doesn't qualify as a maximum extent practicable standard for the standards 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And the applicant is aware of that. Again, this is something that we would have to discuss when we talk about the ACEC work and any of the other questions I had pertaining to these standards. Standard 8 construction, period, pollution prevention. The proponent included a construction plan within their stormwater report, identifying limits of the clearing and grubbing. I wasn't sure what percentage of trees were being taken out. Is it all the area? What's being saved for trees? I would like to see some discussion on that. They provided tubular erosion control barriers to protect the resource areas and the catch basin filters. And they provided a stabilized construction exit for the trucking system. I guess my concerns here is I've seen a lot of these projects over the years where the applicants put in the required measures, but I just want to emphasize here that with the slopes of this property, I think there's a concern about when stuff is being cleared, what gets done after it's cleared, basically the sweet sequencing of everything that goes on. In particular, when the driveway goes in, things like that, making sure that once something is cleared and there's exposed soils, yes, they do have an outline that they're going to do it within, I think it was 72 hours or something like that. My experience is it's very important to be aware of what's going on with the weather and following the weather forecast and things like that, where you might have to speed up your coverage of certain areas. So I would just like to emphasize, the descriptions look appropriate, but we want to convey the seriousness of this issue because of the slopes and what goes on during construction is critical to what's going to affect the neighbors and what's going to affect the drainage and resource areas downstream. And the operation and maintenance plan that was provided, it was detailed and included the appropriate measures. I would caution the town to work out ownership and enforcement of the operation and maintenance plan. Right now, it's owned by the real estate company, and at some point in time, the ownership's going to change. This is more of a ownership and enforcement measure that maybe the town should keep an eye on going forward. The proponent did mention something about, a housing, a group housing, a group there to take care of more than one of these properties, if that's something that was agreed upon. So that's something we would have to discuss in the future too, as far as enforcing a lot of this stuff going forward. There were no illicit discharges, standard 10, so that's good. And as far as the town of Hamilton standard reviews, I just noted that, for now, it does not appear that it complies with all parts of the stormwater handbook, as I just discussed with the first 10 standards. The stormwater management plan did not seem to contain an evaluation of all low impact development techniques and why they were eliminated as an option. And the town guidelines talk about curve numbers and the TR 20 and TR 55 method as the standard. This project was done through that standard. I also confirmed that they used the correct rainfall distribution, which was the type 3 24-hour. This is a common issue with some of the submittals. Sometimes they do not select the right distribution. So this was correct, and I just documented that. And again, the stormwater management system and the TSS removal and the phosphorus removals. I would like to see more discussion or documentation on that. And if it's not something that's obtainable, 90%, there were other calculations and guidelines that needed to be met because it was an either or situation. So that's something we would have to address if the 90% is not achievable. And I guess we noted there's a concern of whether all surface flow from the driveway will enter the riprap swale in the bioretention system. I guess maybe a more detailed, localized survey that show that it's actually going to get there. It seems questionable that it's all going to get there. What portion of it could end up on Miles River Road was something we would be concerned about. And I guess that's it.
Thank you, Bill. Quick jurisdictional question. In standard 3 and standard 4, you refer to needing waivers and or authorization from the Governing Conservation Commission.
Yes.
Is that a statutory thing? And the reason why I'm asking is because the planning board in Hamilton is the standard or the stormwater management special permit granting authority.
Yes.
So would it be the planning board?
It would be the planning board if that's who's looking to approve the permit.
Okay, yes, so it
Yes.
would be. I
Yes,
just
and
wanted that clarification for the board and the applicant. Thank you.
Yep.
So now I think we can open it up to the board to board members to ask questions or seek clarifications.
I have a series of questions, having lived on that area for some 30 years and watched storms and runoff in the past. So I guess I would direct this first to the applicant and ask that the Weston and Sampson engineer chime in. It's just a series of questions. So the runoff currently from that land is actually not as much as you might think. I gather that the soils are quite porous, and Perkwell is there's no ledge there. It's mostly sand and gravel. Is it very permeable soil? Question.
I would not categorize it in that fashion. We did perk tests in a number of areas for the septic systems, and the rates are more in the line of 20 minutes per inch, something that is considered a sandy loam with much more finer particles. I think there's a fair amount of water that comes off the hill. Having walked the land a lot, I think it does not percolate well into the soil.
Okay. So your swales around the site are going to direct water coming, not just from the property, but from uphill the property. Any runoff water is going to be directed all right to this bioretention system. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, where does it go from the bioretention system?
So the bioretention system has that outlet that I described that ties into the municipal drainage system, then a culvert, and eventually an off-site wetland area.
Right. It goes under the street. There's a pipe there, and then it goes out to the wetlands to the northwest, right?
Correct.
So it seems to me that with much more hard surface on the site, as opposed to soil, that the amount of water after the development happens that goes into that catch basin system is going to increase considerably. Is that a fair assessment? Rather than having any percolation through the site, it's going to run off and into the system and eventually wind up in the catch basin.
So unmitigated, certainly, when you add pavement and building, there is more runoff. However, your ordinance requires that we meet the historic flow rates leaving the property. That's why we have a stormwater management facility. Mitigates for rate of runoff and also provides water quality treatment.
Okay, that's within the property, but how do you know once you have a larger share of water running down to the street relative through your bioretention system, as opposed to currently just coming down on the soil? How do you know the catch basin and drainage system out to the wetlands can handle that extra water? I understand that's maybe the city's responsibility, but I'm asking you, is there a possibility of sufficient increases in the flow to overrun that catch basin drainage system?
So we're not changing the flow path either with the development. I mean, the swales are there, but they're there to prevent the stormwater from being in the backyard. The water is still going to the corner of Miles River Road and Bridge Street. That's where it goes today. The only difference is before it gets there, we're capturing it, detaining it, treating it, and then releasing it.
But actually a little more water goes to Miles River and Bridge Street. Because
actually, there's a reduction.
Because you're replacing soil with hard surface.
Right, but a reduction in the rate of runoff.
How is there a reduction in the total rate of runoff to the corner?
That's what a detention facility does. It knocks the rate of runoff. It reduces the rate of runoff. Temporarily stores the water, reduces it at a controlled rate.
Oh, I see. So it's like a sponge.
More like a surge tank. No, a sponge. I'll take that. You got to squeeze the sponge at the end, though.
Okay, so there's more water, but the bioretention system starts off dry and then fills up and then empties out. I understand.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, and you're confident enough in an era when storms seem to be increasing the amount of rain, that
So
this is going to work for the next 10 or 15 years, not just the last 10 or 15 years?
Again, a very valid point. I've been doing the stormwater modeling full time since 1999, and I have seen a number of increases in the rainfall intensity that we use. 20 years ago, the rates were much less, but the tables that the town requires is NRCS extreme precipitation tables, and they are specific to your geography, your part of New England, your part of Massachusetts, and they do take into account future increases. And I think Weston and Sampson can chime in on that as well. And it's designed for the 100-year event, so I think there's a fair degree of safety factor built in there.
Okay, now all the other lots, they're going to be developed not on Miles River, but along Bridge Street. They're going to have some kind of similar system, we can presume. But once
Yes.
again, they're each going to have their own sponge, as I like to use the analogy.
That's right.
So they're not going to add to the total amount of water that the catchment basin at the intersection of the two roads is designed to handle, in theory.
So not all of the property flows to the intersection of Miles River Road and Bridge Street. There are 3 culverts on Bridge Street that go due north. Those would also we'd have to meet the same standard, yes, for each lot. Some type of mitigation.
Each lot on this side of the.
Yes. No increase in rate of runoff at any of the design points.
Okay. I sure hope the sponge works. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a couple questions. The first question is, I know that it's necessary to dig test pits and get onto the site and understand what's going on. But when I drive by the site, it appears that there's quite a bit more clearing and digging than just is involved in test pits. And so, for example, just in the in the sedimentation guidelines, it talks about, the steps in setting up a plan, which is, looking at the slopes, looking at the forests, figuring out where your development area is, sort of getting it on paper first. And I'm just curious a little bit about the process that you've gone through and the extent that you've cleared so far. That's the first question. I have some other questions behind that. So you want to just first answer that question?
I can answer that question,
Go
Brian.
ahead, John.
So we cleared and did the work that you're referring to actually before these regulations came out. I believe it was in November. And when they did, we stopped doing any further work and have not done any more work on the site until all of this while we're here.
So well, there was a revision to the bylaws that went from, I think, 80% TSS to 90% and some other changes, but the basic steps in creating a stormwater management plan or a sedimentation plan, I don't think have changed in, 30, 40 years.
Well, we had a meeting with the building department, the planning department, and DPW before we actually cleared the lot. So at that time, we didn't know that we weren't allowed to clear the lot prior to having a stormwater management plan. We knew that we needed this plan approved before you could ever get a building permit to build anything. But in terms of some of the site work, that was not made clear to us at the time. And that's why we proceeded with the work. And then once it was, we have not done any work since.
Okay.
And I'll add too, tree harvesting is generally not considered a land disturbing activity. Grubbing certainly is. But if you're taking down mature trees, that's not disturbing the soil. You can do that
it's
on
not
land.
disturbing the soil, but it's part of the first steps in creating a stormwater and sedimentation plan.
Yes, it is.
So I would say that is it it seems a little bit like the cart's ahead of the horse here. So anyway, but that aside, so my next question is more for Weston and Sampson. So my basic understanding of stormwater management bylaws and standards is that it principally focuses on how the water runs across the surface and the increase of impervious surfaces and managing those two things. And it really doesn't deal too much with lawn infiltration or much of any change in the subsurface flow, the geohydrology across the face of the ledge conditions. Now, first of all, are there ledge conditions? This is a general question for all folks here. Is there ledge under this hillside?
So we have not encountered any ledge in any of our test pits.
Okay.
Not to say that it's not there, but we have not encountered it.
Okay, so no ledge. But again, back to a question for Weston and Sampson, my understanding is that the stormwater standards mostly focus on impervious area and the changes to the sort of the topography and how the surface flow is working. And it doesn't really deal with when you remove tree cover, root cover, duff and whatnot, how the water moves under, meaning geohydrology, through a site. Would that be a reasonable statement? That's
Yes.
for West. That's
Yeah, that's a reasonable statement, and the stormwater standards themselves really focus on the recharge and making sure there's no loss of recharge.
right.
And,
Right.
And that's in particular is kind of the only component for the underwater flow path.
Right.
is
So,
recharge.
so if we focus back on kind of what the new patterns of flow might be, if we, and I'm jumping ahead and I don't have any information here on the specifics of this, but let's say, for example, well, let me just frame a scenario and folks can weigh in on this. If that water is moving under that site, not across the surface, and it has now, we have nothing to do with the stormwater management retention basin at the bottom, but if it's moving under the soil and hitting the edge of the road I would assume has a sub base under it, which is hopefully relatively porous, and because that's what would make it stable. And so the question would be, would the water tend to go, when it hits the bottom of that slope and the edge of Bridge Street, would it tend to flow under the road and and then move on down the hill? So that's a question, just sort of a general pattern of movement question. Again, we don't know the details of it, but would that be generally kind of what you'd want to look at in terms of overall flow on this site?
Is that for me or was that for Weston and Sampson?
I'd love to hear from both of you.
I'll chime in first. So Bridge Street, if you've driven it, has a roadside swale right on the Gordon College side. It runs all the way up and down. That's generally what's done to intercept groundwater before it hits a roadway base. And I'm sure that's why they constructed it as such. So that will intercept any groundwater or surface water before it hits the roadway base.
Yes,
So-
that what do you call it, drainage ditch really only exists from the crest of the hill eastward. From the crest of the hill down to Miles River is really very little. I don't see any of it because I used to live there. And then along Miles River, there's no drainage ditch. There is a ditch with a culvert that goes through to the marsh from the crest of the hill. That would be eastward.
Just to clarify my question, it's not about the surface water. I know the surface water will be caught in that culvert. It's more the subsurface water. And the reason I'm asking this is if the trees and root system are removed, then my experience is the water moves differently through the subsurface and then would be received differently at the culvert. And then the question is kind of how that would operate. Now, I was walking there today and it was well below freezing. I've walked there a few other times when it was well below freezing. And there's running water coming down the hill and into that culvert, even in sub-freezing weather. So I guess my question is, if the subsurface water were to be increased by removal of trees and the stormwater management standards are somewhat silent on that, what would be a strategy to make sure that that water doesn't overrun that culvert, go under the road, go across the street under the road? So that's a question for Weston and Sampson and for the applicant.
No, I think it's a valid question. Not speaking for the applicant, I would say currently, with the groundwater so high as it is on the property right now, at that low point near the intersection of the roads, it's seeing a high groundwater table currently. So I'm not sure that there's a great difference between the existing and the proposed. I guess the bigger question would be, with all these trees gone, how much does the groundwater go up?
Essentially, my question is, what's the delta with tree removal? Because my best understanding of tree canopy is yep, in my understanding, contributes with the canopy itself, even the branch surface area in terms of slowing volume and absorption and holding water. Then the root absorption is another percentage. And then just the overall behavior of the root mat is another percentage. And when you remove all of that, there's a different behavior in the area that has nothing to do with impervious surfaces. This is the different change of behavior between tree cover and lawn cover is what I'm focusing on. And what that means to the groundwater level, the speed of runoff, the rate of runoff, and where it's ending up. That's the essence of my question.
So I'd like to point out the town has a stormwater bylaw. It doesn't have a section that requires applicants to address subsurface groundwater. I think you make the rules and we try to follow them. That's not currently one of the regulations. It's not something that you can ask for or require.
Yeah, I understand that. It's really just a point of information. So I'd love to hear from Weston and Sampson about that point of information. And I understand that the stormwater management bylaws are focused on impervious area and changes in topography. They don't really focus on the way it behaves under the surface. But I'd still, just as a point of information, I'd love to hear from Weston and Sampson on that.
Tim, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really dealt with, I guess, that situation, or probably mainly because, it's not really seen too many times in regs and stuff like that. So it's not done as often, I guess. I mean, I can see where you're coming from. We can obviously look into it, but I guess I don't really have too much info on that situation, I guess, because just I haven't.
So it sounds like, well, this is an interesting subject. The stormwater bylaw and the rules and regulations that we can afford on address this subsurface migration of water.
Well, they do and they don't. They do in that the three components of stormwater management start off with first trying to preserve natural vegetation. And the reason for that is because of just what I asked about. In other words, the behavior of how water moves through a site is completely different when you remove the forest cover. So kind of a repeating element in the state bylaws is avoid wherever you can, avoid removing forest cover and replacing with lawn. And on top of that, avoid creating steep slopes with lawns. So those are really, really basic principles that are in the bylaw very specifically, and they precede the priority of doing structural BMPs, which is where all calculations emanate from. So, you know,
I get that, Jonathan.
So this is a regulatory question.
No, I get that.
Yep.
But I don't think what you're not hearing me is, as I understand it, the stormwater bylaws deal with surface water control as opposed to subsurface water control. Is that a correct statement?
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. Right.
Wait a minute. I want to hear from the people that actually do this on a daily basis.
Go ahead.
Is it back to me?
It's back to either you and or Bill.
Well, I agree with Mr. Poor. Trees do uptake groundwater, and it ends up being used for vegetation, or it ends up in the atmosphere. How much is it? I don't know. I've never done that calculation. It's kind of a biological question when we're civil engineers and we deal in the surface realm.
That's what I'm trying to get at here, is that the stormwater bylaw deals with surface runoff. Is that correct or not?
That is correct.
Okay.
And although it does require you to recharge a certain quantity. So actually introducing water into the ground.
I get that, but it's taking the surface runoff and controlling that surface runoff to recharge into the groundwater. Is that correct?
Not all of it has to recharge, only a small percentage. So you can't increase the rate of runoff leaving your site in the surface condition.
But you're not dealing with the flow of groundwater per se.
No.
Okay.
No.
So that's the regulatory hole. And this is the same thing that we were talking about in a previous application, is the stormwater bylaw, from what I understand, and I could be corrected, is dealing with water that's on the surface and its direction, containment, and control to prevent erosion and to recharge back into the ground.
Correct.
Okay. So while it's an interesting discussion, Jonathan, and it says to the greatest extent possible, you should eliminate taking down trees, clearing, and I get that. I think that's a wonderful idea. That really gets into low impact development. And I'm a little concerned, as somebody mentioned, and maybe it was Bill, that this kind of seems like cart was put before the horse, is the development started before actually doing all this engineering analysis to come up with a stormwater management plan. So it's a kind of a mucky mess if you look at it visually, that it was kind of done ass backwards.
Well, let me tie this back to Bill's specific peer review comments. So he mentioned that alternatives were not, and please, Bill, correct me if I misquote what you said. What needs to be looked at here is low impact development alternatives to this. And do you mind, or Bill, do you want to read? I have, this is really germane to this. I've got volume 2, chapter 1, just a couple sentences to read from the stormwater manual. So this is really getting at the heart of what the task is here. And this is the bylaw. I just want to read from the bylaw, if that's okay. May I do that?
That's the low impact bylaw.
No, this is the chapter 1, volume 2, the 3 components of stormwater management. This is like this is foundational.
Got it.
Okay. So the end of the first paragraph closes with, to meet the stormwater management standards, a project proponent needs to consider the following 3 stormwater management components in this order of priority. 1, Site planning, design the development using environmentally sensitive site design and low development techniques to preserve natural vegetation, minimize impervious surfaces, slow down times of concentration, and reduce runoff. 2, source controls, pollution prevention and construction, period erosion, and sediment control, implement non-structural measures to prevent pollution or control it at its source. And 3, now we're at the place where all the calculations are. Last thing, after you've done these first 2, is structural BMPs, design, construct, and maintain structural BMPs, best management practices, to attenuate peak flows, capture and treat runoff, and provide recharge to groundwater. So that's what, that last thing is what's designed at the bottom corner of the site. But
And the first 2, I would argue. I mean, our grass swales are a non-structural BMP. That's number
agreed.
2.
Absolutely agreed. Absolutely agreed. What's key here is that number 1 is that's where the trees and the behavior of the trees come in. And that's why that's the first priority. So I'm not saying that we need to put the trees back, but I'm saying that there's a step in here and it's jurisdictional. And the question is, how can we as a group kind of analyze the difference between, how that thing behaves with the roots in place and the trees in place, which is again, item 1, and how it's behaving now, and make sure that it's doing no harm, that it's behaving the way it should, that it's not in any way putting water where it shouldn't be, whether it's under the road, across the street, on the surface of the street, that's all. So to your point, Mr. Chairman, it must be jurisdictional, and this is jurisdictional. And now I'm saying, let's put our heads together and see if there's any concerns or issues around this. And then what are the strategies? Because we have some neighbors that I think have some input and concerns around this. So it might be that we need to really look a little bit beyond the retention strategy at the corner of the slope. In other words, is there anything else we should consider here to make sure that this is the best it can be for the sake of the developer and the sake of the neighbors and the sake of the town?
So I'd pose that to Bill.
Yes, please.
Yeah, one of the things that I was looking at in the review, I was wondering why, the driveway couldn't be porous pavement. That's a low impact design measure that could probably be done.
We did think about that. I'm sure you noticed it's pretty steep driveway because of the steep site. You can't do porous pavement on a driveway that's more than 8%. You can't do it. All the water rushes down to the low point and percolates back through the pavement.
Yeah.
So I don't think that really answers Jonathan's question, and maybe I'm wrong. So Jonathan, I think Jonathan was looking for a more holistic approach of are there other things that can be done to expand or modify the system that would, as I understand it, return it to or deal with what the runoff might have been without the tree removal.
And I think, Bill, all things are open to discussion, I think, here. Any low impact development, any strategy that manages water, I think is a great discussion point. So I think at this point, casting a broad net is a great idea. And it'd be lovely to have everybody be creative about this. But it is a steep slope. It is, we've heard that there are concerns from the peer review, and let's lean into it and see if we can make it better.
I agree, and that's why we had the comment that an evaluation of why some of these weren't evaluated. There's only so much you can do on a single lot. So a lot of times these low impact development measures kind of work hand in hand with multiple lots where there's, something that they can use as a group in a composite situation, whether it's, the rain gardens and stuff like that. So when you're working on an individual lot, yes, you should evaluate what low impact designs can we do with the minimal area that we have. And that's what we should kind of focus on.
Right, and I think this gets to what Patrick was alluding to previously, is that we need to, if we can, look at all these lots in conjunction so that we have a cohesive stormwater management plan. We're kind of the horses out of the barn, if you will, on this, at least on this particular lot, because we're looking at this now. So I'm curious as to how we would deal with that. I mean, I know in the future, and I think the applicant, and on Murphy, I believe, understands now that none of the other lots that have been cleared can be cleared until there's a stormwater management plan in place. So for those other, how many lots are there? 6, 7 other lots?
There are
Nine lots.
9 lots in total.
Okay, so the 7 other or 8 other lots could be taken in conjunction and treated as a unified project. Does that make sense?
Well,
Is that
ideally with lot number 1 right now, which is the applicant's submittal,
Yeah.
I think they own lot number 2 also, but they don't own 3. So ideally 1, 2, and 3, gradient wise and slope wise work well together. Is something that should be considered in the future and while we're doing this lot, but I'm not sure that we're at a point where we can put demands on the applicant at this time. But, working with 1, 2, and 3 as a group makes a lot of sense right now.
We
Right,
don't own lot number 2.
You don't own 2.
Okay, so so we're really forced to deal with this unique situation now, but I'm talking to the board and to Patrick as well, that since we don't have an applicant that owns lot 2 or any of the remaining lots, that those other lots should be, if we can, legally be conjoined and dealt with as a unified project as it relates to stormwater. Is that possible, Patrick?
I have been talking with Mr. Murphy, Weston and Sampson, and I spoke with the owner of Lot 2 today, who is also a bit guardedly interested in working with us as well, understanding that, as has been discussed, there are a great number of limitations in being able to do LID kinds of approaches and holding capacity the way that this overall property really needs on single solitary lots. So there's a real need to look holistically at all of the property as much as we have an extent to be able to work out drainage approaches that, again, protect this property, protect town property, as well as the residents who live across the street. And it's really difficult to do that in isolation. So John Murphy has been very cooperative and workable in terms of talking about opportunities to address that. I think that the best approach would be to either have their engineering focus or and possibly working with Weston and Sampson to assert the town's interest too in coming up with a joint kind of solution that could address the drainage issues that this property presents. And clearly dealing with it in isolation, one lot at a time, isn't an untenable, unworkable approach. But, our regs don't allow us to work in that composite way, that the way that a subdivision approval plan would. So that's one of the issues that cities and towns and planners have with dealing with A&R lots, is they very often create issues that have to be dealt with in isolation. And at the developer's detriment, it deals with placing often very large capital expenses on small projects.
So from that very detailed description, I'm taking away is that we do not have the authority to enforce or bring together the individual A&R lot owners into a collective discussion about stormwater management.
Well,
May I just
Mr.
interject?
Murphy owns 6 of the lots, and that's a big bonus for this discussion. As I had mentioned, I did speak with the owners of lot number 2 today, and they're interested in working with us, but I don't have anything concrete on that yet. I think that we need to sort of get some sort of parameters put together in how we can make this advantageous for everybody's purposes. Everyone is aware that you're not going to get a building permit on any of these lots until you have a stormwater management special permit.
So the special permit is discretionary.
That's true.
Okay, so
But
that's
you have some pretty detailed criteria with which to satisfy, though.
Could I just raise another issue here? And it's one that really needs to be considered before we potentially go down a rabbit hole. And that is when these lots are sold to individual buyers, how do you mandate that they basically join together and share the costs of a shared system, absent some kind of condominium association, which isn't going to happen here, some type of association that has enforcement mechanisms. And of course, if there is no condominium association, some of the lot owners, would refuse to, or maybe financially unable to meet a commitment to a larger, more effective, ideally a better solution, but one that I think legally is fraught with some issues. So I think that is one of the first things to consider. And I speak a little bit from experience because I live in a neighborhood that is subject to covenants, and those covenants are actually recorded, and I can tell you they are observed in the breach, not all the time, but some of the time. So in terms of an operations manual and whatnot, whether these group of lot owners that exist 10 years from now, after our present owners are gone, are going to subscribe to this kind of a situation. It would be very unique, I think, from a legal point of view.
So Marnie, that's a great point, and I'd love to just add something to it that might sort of build more opportunities. I agree that it's complicated if you are sharing a maintenance agreement or a maintenance contract, but there may be ways on this, and I'm not here to prescribe or design, but I've done enough of these sort of cooperative projects where we get neighbors to cooperate, we get different landowners to cooperate. I've done these things and done them very successfully. Done a lot of permitting, joint permitting with different landowners, and there may be ways, it's worth exploring. It's worth opening the broader net to this. There may be ways to just create simple easements where you don't share a high maintenance, rain garden, but you allow a pipe to cross at the foot of the hill or something to another rain garden. There's different ways to do this. And you have a very good point, but I don't think it necessarily closes the door on that idea. And like I said, I've had great success in collaborations between neighbors from a regulatory, joining up in a regulatory manner, and also joining up in a shared resource manner. I don't want to go into it here, but I've had a lot of success with that, and I would love to promote that conversation here.
Well, that's an excellent point, and I don't say that it's not a good solution. I just think that we have to consider any legal ramifications because before trying to get all this together and then have it fall apart.
Absolutely agreed. And what I would say to the applicant is my experience in doing these endeavors is I've had tremendous success in sharing costs and regulatory burdens where it's been a really outstanding win-win situation. So that's a little pep talk from the side here saying, if it's interesting, I think there's potentially opportunities in there. And yes, Marnie brings up a very good point. You want to keep it legally clean. So that's my pep talk.
What are your thoughts?
I mean, my thoughts are this is not even close to a straightforward situation, and I can really appreciate all the concerns and thoughts out there. I mean, it isn't very important to note that legally speaking, these are all separate pieces of property. My partner and I, we do own 6 of them. Theoretically, tomorrow they can all be sold individually, and you're only dealing with us on lot 1. So there is a lot that goes into this, some type of condo association, anything along those lines. It's probably going to be very hard for us to sell these houses, with the size of the houses and what we're trying to build here in the Hamilton market with something like that. And I don't see us maybe pursuing that. I'm open to ideas if it truly is a win-win for everyone to explore something. But as you can see, we just spent 40 minutes or over an hour on just the details of one lot. So it would be, I guess I would look for some engineers to weigh in here that if each individual lot is meeting the state local bylaws to the point where the board is happy to grant a special permit, and all 9 lots do that, at what point is that maybe an okay process to pursue because you really addressed all 19 and change acres, knowing that, I don't know from a legal perspective how, I guess I'm open to suggestions, but I'm getting a little bit, I don't want to say uncomfortable, but I'm a little bit concerned how to really handle this.
And I'll offer one other data point. There are multiple places where the stormwater leaves the property, and we can't consolidate all the stormwater into one location or 2 locations or 3 locations. We have to match what's happening today. There's 3 culverts on Bridge Street. Those are going to see runoff after the end of the development. The one at the corner of Miles River and Bridge Street. So that there really isn't one solution that works either for grading or even for historic flow rates and patterns. And then I guess one other thing, low impact development, you try to treat it at the source, right? So instead of combining 3 or 4 lots and doing one large stormwater management system, you would capture, treat, detain for each lot. Isn't that what your bylaw is looking for low impact development?
Well, it's funny. I think the low impact development should be done before any clearing. That whole thought process should be going on before anything happens on that site. Is how can we engineer this site to be the least disruptive of the current geography, hydrology, geohydrology, and then figure out how you're going to work a stormwater management system to contain and direct the flows that are created by that development, as opposed to, and I don't know the particulars of that site. It just looked like it was clear cut. And then it was like, oh, okay, so we're going to put in a house on a road, need a stormwater management system to deal with it. I think that we've got imperfect tools here. I mean, I like the idea if we could do some kind of joint collective plan, but I understand the legal and logistical and market challenges that we face. So I'm wondering if we can think about, and I'm sensitive to Mr. Murphy's position as a developer who's going to buy properties, build them and sell them. And that's what his focus is going to be, is wondering if we can enter into a low impact development approach to this that really requires a lot less or significantly less or somewhat less stormwater management when you clear cut a lot.
May I offer another creative suggestion for the engineers to bat around? Another thing that I find works very well, but I'd love to hear from both engineers or all engineers, is one thing that I think really addresses steep slopes with lawns, which really the stormwater management bylaws discourage. And if instead you approach it with a terraced approach, where you're actually bringing in, more plant material, more root mass, you're slowing the runoff rate down. And instead of creating high maintenance rain gardens, which you need to have your rain garden, obviously, but instead of having all these steep slopes that don't really address what's not going in the rain garden, if you do a little bit of terracing, I find there's tremendous success in slowing the rate of runoff down, and in it being naturalized and not creating a high maintenance thing that has to be regulated and inspected. And over time it naturalizes and gets lower and lower maintenance. And it also, I find, enhances sale value, because it just looks better than a steep slope lawn. It's easier to maintain once it's established. So there's just a creative idea. I'm trying to again cast a broad net to make the best of this. Any comments from the engineers?
So that's something we can look at. There are other constraints too. Obviously, we have to work with a septic system that has its own statute and regulations for grading and breakout and depth of groundwater. Can't plant any trees or vegetation above a septic system. That has to be lawn. We do have a retaining wall. So I guess to some degree, you could say there's a terrace on the property, both behind the building and along the driveway.
I think
I'm
this
open
is
to it. I don't know if it gives us that much credit though that you're talking about. It would be an added cost, but not really a reduction in stormwater runoff that we could take credit for.
Bill, do you want to weigh in on that a little bit?
I agree with what he's saying there because of the site itself and the somewhat limitations. Ideally, terracing is good when there's a benefit from it, and often they're very costly. So there needs to be that benefit from it. So I agree with what he's saying there.
I think what
As you move down Bridge Street, the slopes get so much more steep that you may have to terrace anyway. I mean, I'm not sure you can have a 3-to-1 slope lawn or even a 2-to-1 in one or two areas.
Can I make a suggestion? Jonathan, you've got excellent ideas, and you're asking engineers to redesign the site, and they're really not. That's not their bailiwick. I think the discussion really needs to happen with John is going forward. what low impact kind of techniques can be used on the property to minimize the runoff, and what we think as holistically as possible, given they are individual lots, what he as a developer can do, and what the town potentially should be doing in conjunction with that development, mitigate to the greatest extent possible the negative impacts of that development in terms of water flows. We're dealing with an imperfect stormwater bylaw. The applicant is looking at the statute and going, okay, this is what I have to comply with. The engineers look at the same thing and say, okay, this is what it tells us. But they're not equipped and don't have the background in looking at the greater, I'm not saying they can't do this, I'm just saying we're really talking about planning here, land use planning, and how to encourage low impact development that minimizes land disturbance and water, right? So I think that discussion really is probably best had with John Murphy, is going forward, the 6 properties he owns, the other property owner, is what are the things can we do within the confines of the bylaws that we have to minimize the disturbance and water flows that impact both that piece of land and the abutters.
So my one, just if I could be very direct. So let's just take the 6 lots that we own currently, say both engineering firms, the towns and ours, completely agree on every detail, that we meet every single part of it, that theoretically that would be able to be accepted. The town and the board is saying, no, even though you meet the rules, regulations, and guidelines, we want this some other type of approach, whether it be holistic, who gets involved with that? It's almost, like it's going across the street to Bridge Street and asking all those neighbors to contribute to, they're all each individual landowners, to contribute to something greater, even though rules and regulations are already being met across the street. I don't know, having worked in many different towns, how this has, to be honest, worked out well. So again, open to ideas. It's a very fuzzy gray area. There's nothing concrete that we can follow. We kind of have to come up with it on the fly. And you can understand that we've been working on just this one lot, spent thousands and thousands of dollars for 4 months. And so we're going to leave here tonight not knowing anything more than we did 4 months ago in terms of when we can actually build a house on this individual lot that is individually legally separated from the other lots, and really what this process is. I don't even fully understand what we're exploring from here on out, because there's nothing to follow.
Let me see if I can, and I get your concern and confusion. Believe me, if I were in your position, I'm going, wait a minute, I bought these lots in good faith. I've complied with the bylaw. So here's what I'm going to suggest is lot one is lot one, where we've got what we've got, and we really can't suddenly try and combine it with something that hasn't yet been developed. And I'm not asking you to think about combining with the neighbors or anything else. I'm thinking about, can you look at our low impact design standards and say, okay, are there things that I could do to mitigate the total land clearing that would help reduce the runoff that would occur on this property and require a more expensive stormwater management plan? So it's really thinking, what's in my best interest in terms of economics? What can I do to sort of lessen both the visual and the stormwater runoff impact that may actually help lower the cost of doing stormwater management? We're working with imperfect tools here to try and come up with the best solution possible. the tools that we have don't allow the kind of collective design that would be optimal here. So it's really, it's the power of persuasion. We're trying to help think about things that you can do within the confines of the existing bylaws.
So if I say, so two-part question, I guess, back for you. If I were to say that I can work with the planning department, both engineering firms, so everyone feels fairly represented, to talk about, say, lots 3, 4, 5, and 6, what's the process? So if I say we can do that to kind of look at some of what you're referencing, what's the process for dealing with the actual lot that we're here today after we leave this meeting?
Well, I'm going to have my own opinion, but other board members may, and this may require Patrick and maybe legal interpretation here. As I said earlier, I think the horse is out of the barn. We're into the middle of the process and trying to reverse this process and say, wait, hold on, stop. We want to go back and re-engineer and use a tool that is not built to do what we're talking about here, is be more collective. So I'm thinking we just sort of have to continue with this and make it the best possible project we can and address the issues our peer review has pointed out in the deficiencies of the current stormwater plan, and move forward with that, and then come back with you, and I think that's going to probably require sitting down probably with Patrick and saying, okay, so what are the things that we could do to incorporate low impact design into these lots 3, 4, 5, and 6, if anything. So it would be a cooperative, but understanding that the tools we have, we can't force you to do that.
Well, can I just interject here? Because in fact, Jonathan was right. And the Massachusetts Stormwater Handbook does lay out the specific process that someone who's designing a stormwater management system should take. And the first step is site planning, and the last step is the structural BMP. So, I mean, there is an opportunity, whether some type of collective approach is feasible or not. Even on a per lot basis, you start with the site planning and then move to the source controls and then finally the BMP. So it's not, any type of novel requirement. It's right there in the Massachusetts handbook, and I know Mr. Jones knows this, and I'm sure our peer reviewer knows these things. So I think that it's pretty obvious how you start the process, whether you can actually, do it perfectly. You might end up with more BMPs than might be, well, in a perfect world, you might not want as many, but these are difficult lots because of the nature of where they are on the hillside.
Right. But I think we need to answer his question is, what do we do with lot 1? Because as I said, we're past that first step.
But he had questions about the other lots.
Right. No. Let's see.
In my opinion, we have an application before us. We owe it to the applicant to address that application. At the same time as we're working through those kinds of complexities, I'm more than happy to work with Mr. Murphy, our engineers, his engineers, to look at other opportunities, that help address their property, the public property, as well as the abutters across the street. But we have a responsibility to act on the submission that's before the town. Weston and Sampson did a very thorough review. There are a number of points that need to be addressed by the applicant's engineers. I recommend that those issues be addressed between, Mr. Jones and Weston and Sampson. Those areas of meeting of the minds need to come back to the board so the board can make a decision.
Yeah, and
If
if
I have a question about lot number one. Again, all these lots are going to work in a particular way, a very similar way, at least at this point, which is they're all going to try and use swales to direct water from the hill that comes down into a bioretention system. And then they all have these big driveways that are going to be at quite some steep slope. And as I look at lot one, I see how the swales form sort of a horseshoe and they're connected by an underground pipe. And then that directs all the water from there into the bioretention pond. What I don't quite understand is what happens to water flowing down the driveway itself. Perhaps Weston and Sampson can address that. That water looks to me to go right out into the street culvert because the driveway has to connect smoothly into the street. And I can't see any way that water, and that's a big driveway. There's a lot of water going to come down that driveway. I can't see how that water gets into the bioretention pond. Is maybe, Bill, can you?
Yes, I brought that up as a concern in my review.
Okay.
That was one of the items in my review for us to discuss with the engineering team.
And I mean, that could be a lot of water, and this assertion that somehow the bioretention system is going to actually reduce the outflow from the property into the culvert and down to the wetlands, kind of presumes that there's no real water coming down that driveway, and there might be an awful lot.
I'll just speak to the design intent, whether it needs some clarity or modification, but the driveway is pitched to one side with a curb, and then at the bottom, there's a curb break with a sluice that directs the driveway runoff into the bioretention
The
area.
bioretention thing. Okay.
Okay, so I think, go ahead.
I mean,
Just-
this
sorry.
is going to be like all these systems. Once leaves get in that little, culvert entranceway, then the water's going to flow out onto the street. The same is true of the bioretention system. As the outflow pipe gets clogged up over time, who's gonna fix that? And then the water's going to spill over and go out into the street. So, I mean, I have a town. I lived at 180 Bridge Street, and I had the town put in a whole huge sewer. I guess it was a culvert, and that it was before our driveway. And every single year, it got filled up. And if I didn't go out there and shovel it and clean it and do everything else, I'd have thousands of gallons of water flowing down my driveway. So, maintenance is a really big issue. On the steeper the hills, the more the flow, the more the maintenance problem.
Can I talk to a question for John? I've had my hand raised here for a while pertaining to his question a while ago. The question you had about the current lot and then the lots 3, 4, 5, and 6 and so forth. Do you have any vision on what you're thinking for the stormwater plan for lot number 3, as it is upgrading of lot number 1? And is there, I mean, the design point for lot number 3 would still be the same design point for lot number 1, isn't it?
I mean,
Isn't
that's
it?
probably a better question for Brian. I would say we haven't
Sure, yes.
really explored. So lot 3, not one test pit, not one anything nothing has been explored on that lot. So as of right now, it's not even buildable.
Right. No, I
mean,
just trying
that's
to
one
address
thing for
I was
everyone.
trying to address your
Yeah.
question about, your other lots. And
Yeah, so
ideally,
that's just one thing for everyone to keep in mind is obviously until you have a successful perk test, these individual lots that we're talking about are worthless, can't do a single thing on them, nothing would ever be touched on them. So it is important to know that if we're, and that's why we're here on lot 1, is because we have all of those things and we're looking to develop it. And this land is very sensitive to storms, and we had more rain last year, and we were out there every single week, and we had a few failed ones. So there's no guarantee that, say, lot 6, you ever even build a house on. So that's also something, as we're, talking about all these lots collectively, that we need to consider. Are we doing stormwater on a lot that we're never going to build a house on? So, I mean, there are other factors that kind of go into this as well.
Yeah, I was just trying to address the question that you had about lot 1 and the rest of your lots. I mean, it seems to me that lots 1 and 3, are pretty much common as far as how you would deal with the stormwater issues, because I think they both go to the same study point or design point.
Yeah, I would say I think lot 3 is even a little flatter, to be honest.
Oh, that's fine, but I'm talking about the flow point. The flow path is still down to SP1, I believe. So you wouldn't be able to take flow from lot 3 and bring it out onto Miles Road, because that's like a new outfall. So I just think maybe, when you go to do lot number 3, is there something that you could have done on lot number 1 to prepare for it, I guess? But like you said, you don't know when that's going to happen. So I just not, if you haven't had any thoughts on how you would deal with lot number 3, Brian, maybe that's something you should start, conceptually planning, I guess.
Yeah, I think it would be something similar to what we're doing on lot 1. I mean, once we work the details out and you're satisfied with it, we would look to reproduce that. And each owner is responsible for each small bioretention area. I would think that's ideal.
No, I guess my question is, what's the outlet for the lot 3 bioretention? Ideally, it's going down to
right. So there is a swale. There is a swale on Bridge Street. I know it's shallow, as Mr. Wheaton said. It's not well defined in that area, but the water, there is a swale along Bridge Street, and it flows towards the corner of the intersection of the streets.
Okay.
Well, that might be an area where there could be at least some initial discussion with both the planning department and the DPW. As you said, Mr. Murphy, you don't know whether all the other lots are developable. But if they are, and these projects proceed, then it's highly likely the town's probably going to have to invest money to upgrade whatever the culverts are to divert water. There's just going to be probably more running off in terms of driveways, et cetera. And so I'm thinking that if that's the case, then the town needs to be prepared for that and understand when, where, and how that's going to have to happen to make these projects workable and lessen the impact on the neighbors.
I mean, the purpose of your bylaw is to prevent off-site impacts, right? That's the whole purpose of the bylaw. So theoretically, we address stormwater in each of the lots. Downstream infrastructure should not be affected.
Yep. I know that's what the theory is.
That is the theory.
That's not always the practice.
No.
Anyway, I think we have to deal with the lot 1 as lot 1 is. So I'm going to recommend that we proceed as we are allowed to under the zoning bylaw, that the applicant make corrections as noted by the peer review, and then come back with the corrections. We do have participants that I'm sure would like to offer their thoughts and opinions or may have questions. So Pat Norton, where are you? Is Pat Norton still with us? Oh, there he is. Are you managing that?
Well, I certainly can, there's one Q&A and no one in the audience has their hands up.
Okay. So why don't we deal with the hands up first?
One.
There's a question.
Oh, go for the
Is that a good
question.
one?
Okay, so Mr. Murphy, this is from Caroline. So, Mr. Murphy, for the other lots that have been clear cut, potentially they are not buildable and will result in flooding problems going forward. The 3 lots across my farm have been clear cut and have very steep slope, and my yard is already undergoing increased flooding.
I
John
don't
Mark.
own those lots.
Okay. Well, that answers that question. So somebody have their hand raised?
Carolyn does. So come on here.
In person.
That was the one we just asked.
Okay, Carolyn, you're connected. You need to unmute yourself.
You know what? I just retired in March and I always had that problem, even pre-retirement. So hopefully you can hear me now.
Yes.
Well, the question was directed to John because I thought potentially those 3 properties were his. I think it is a bigger question that, first of all, the fact that people would come in and clear cut, and according to Mr. Murphy, it sounded like he clear cut or began work taking down the trees really with the understanding he thought of the planning board and stopped only when he learned something different. And so I'm curious as to why, A, a developer would think the same thing about the 3 lots across the street from me, and B, how realistic is or how probable is it that these lots will fail the perk test and then will be left as they are, really stripped of trees going forward? Because that really will present an ongoing problem.
Just real
Carolyn, can you
quick,
give
those
your
lots you're
address?
referring to, those lots you're referring to have passed perk tests and have, I don't know how, at what stage, but septic design, so those will be buildable. So those lots will be following these guidelines. I'm just saying I don't own them. And then the other lots, all the lots going down towards Miles River where have not been touched, those do not have perk tests.
Oh, you haven't had perk tests. Okay,
Yes, that's correct.
thank you.
Is that it?
I mean, obviously, I find this disappointing, candidly, but I don't know if this is the venue for that. I just think the fact that, to your point, I mean, literally, the cart is before the horse here. The trees are gone. My land is flooded, and it's flooding more. I actually have the pipe running in between my house and my neighbor's house, and I have new channels forming in my backyard for water. I have a part of my yard that is always flooded. I mean, it's not useful. You can't use it. I have a big yard, so yes, I can compensate. But I mean, I was underwater before. I am totally saturated since those trees were cut down, and it just was so poorly thought out. Common sense would tell you that if you cut the trees, the runoff's gonna be increased. And I don't know why common sense wasn't used by anybody. So I guess that's a question and a statement.
I think the board would agree with you on that.
I mean, really, I do hope that we can figure out how best to mitigate this. I think the idea of the terraces actually makes a lot of sense. I think the easements actually make a lot of sense. Whatever it takes to get it up and running, it can be a lovely street. It would be nice to see it as a lovely street again. And I just think we need to make forward progress.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we've got another question here. Elizabeth Rossetti. I live at 172 Miles River Road and am extremely concerned about the fact there is no drainage ditch along Miles River Road, limiting the runoff, and the proposed driveway will be pushing water directly onto my property during heavier storms. The road has no curbs either, stopping water from coming directly onto the property. What can we do to mitigate this problem? considered, I think, Bill, you were mentioning that as a concern. Bill, you're muted.
Yes, I did mention that it's a concern for us to discuss. Normally how this goes, I present to them the concerns that I have, or the things I think don't meet the standard, and I give them the opportunity to prove me wrong, because I could be wrong. So it's not like, mine's the final word. It's usually a meeting of the minds between me and Brian, and possibly John, if he's comfortable with that, to work out the issues that I brought up. And yeah, that was one of the issues. And Brian seemed to kind of explain it a little bit earlier on when he was talking about the curbing and things like that. So I
Okay,
guess that would be the process going forward, is us meeting and discussing my comments and resolving them between us.
yeah, so
Whether
you've
that was
heard, yeah, you've heard that as a comment both from the board and from the abutters about that issue up on Miles River Road. So wait a minute, there's one more question. Joe's Roberts, 164 Bridge Street question, who owns? I don't know, can't answer that. Does anybody that's on this call? I don't know what 164 is. Nobody on this Zoom call knows or can answer that either. So I don't see any other questions. So any board members have any other comments they want to make? Then I would suggest that we continue this special permit hearing. Patrick, what's a reasonable time to continue this special permit hearing?
I would think, Brian and Bill, you folks tell me based on the complexity of the items in the application that need to be changed, modified, and resubmitted. How long do you think you need to prepare those to be able to get them back to the board? We typically like to have information to the board a week before meetings. So our next meeting is March the 1st. The following is March the 15th.
I would shoot for the 15th, but I'd like to hear Brian.
If you can do it sooner on March 1st, that would be preferable, because I'll tell you, we're having a very complex discussion about a much larger project involving some of the similar issues, but many more.
Okay.
So I don't know if you guys can do that.
If it's worthwhile, the April meeting, the first April meeting is on the 5th.
I mean,
Not
I'd really
April.
like to see if we can get something. It'd have to be worked out by next Tuesday, the 22nd, to have a week before the meeting. So today's Tuesday. Brian, do you guys think you can get together by the end of this week?
15th.
So is that
Yeah.
getting our information to Bill by next Tuesday?
No, I think the board would need the information by, it looks like, end of the day next Tuesday.
Well, we can try. And if it doesn't look like it's going to happen, we can always request a continuance, right? Is that correct, Patrick?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and I mean, if it's Wednesday, that's not a problem. I'm trying to get it a week, but if it's like 6 days or five days, I think that's reasonable. This is not that complex a document.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, the sooner we obviously get something figured out here, the sooner we can start putting some of these measures in place and get going with the actual lot. If we let this sit till April, we're just more time that things are sitting.
Got it. We'd like to deal with it sooner than later as well. So then we need to make I need a motion to continue the hearing, stormwater management hearing for the Bridge Street property we'll put it on for March 1st. I have a motion to continue this special permit hearing.
I move to continue the hearing to the March 1st meeting.
A second.
Second,
Okay, roll call vote. Emil, you've been very quiet.
I have. Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Jonathan,
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Lori,
Corey Boyu, aye.
Bill,
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Arnie,
Marnie Crouch, aye.
Richard,
Richard Boroff, aye.
and Rick Mitchell, aye. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you.
Okay, so on to board business. Patrick, do you have any board business other than future schedule and minutes?
Future scheduling is again March 1st, March 15th, April the 5th, and a little wrinkle in our schedule is the second meeting in April is actually on the 21st. We did that because I guess that is Patriots Day, and that kind of changed our schedule that particular week. So that's on a Thursday night. I want to make sure that everyone's aware of that ahead of time.
Go ahead.
Also, I did want to mention that we're trying to get our annual reports done for the various boards. I've started drafting one. I'm compiling the information. Is there anyone who would like to edit the product once I get it done?
I can do editing for you if you want, Patrick.
Okay,
I would be happy to do it as well.
super.
Either way.
Okay.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. And also, Patrick, were we talking about the possibility on March 1st of discussing the new, I'm going to call it the MBTA zoning bylaw that requires 15 units per acre within a half mile of transportation hub?
Yeah, we need to have the board have a conversation about that for information purposes. Tomorrow, in fact, I have a Zoom meeting regarding that type of zoning, what expectations are coming from the state. Later in the day, Rick on behalf of the planning board, Jack Lawrence on behalf of the master planning committee, and the town manager and I will have some discussion regarding possible next steps and opportunities, considerations, etc. So
Didn't the town council say that we were in the clear, so to speak, regarding that change?
well, they have been considering it in that it's a zoning change. No one can take the place of the planning board. The planning board is the preeminent local entity that addresses zoning bylaws. So we need to have the board understanding what that state promulgated zoning is for, how it works, what its possibilities are, what its limitations are, You know, and I know the selectmen have sort of strategized what they think a game plan might be. I'm not totally aware of what that is, but I look forward to being made aware of that tomorrow. So Rick and I can report that later.
I can just add to that, that this zoning bylaw, proposed bylaw, it's not mandatory. If you don't do it, you forego certain grants that are available to towns. But I did a little research and we've never gotten one. There are potential downsides with the Commonwealth's refusal to supply certain grant money, but it isn't as if it's an absolute requirement that the town adopt these changes. And
yeah, to your point, Marnie, I don't see it as being a drop dead scenario.
oh, right, yeah, I mean,
like
750 units is crazy.
Yeah, and our lack of a sanitary sewer system has some major implications to that whole calculus. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much the state was envisioning this type of zoning working in communities like ours that doesn't have that component of its local infrastructure. So you know, I'm sure someone's thought about it, but I'm not sure they've written about it. So, you know, we need to find out how it fits, how it doesn't, just for possibility's sake. You will remember that we did back early in 2021, we began a discussion relative to rezoning of property that's north of the shopping center area that takes into consideration the property where our public safety building is, where the Council on Aging is, where the Winthrop School is. There's a fair amount of real estate there that has some future potential for such an opportunity, but I'm in no way, shape, or form would that have the ability to accommodate 750 units.
Yeah. So anyway, we'll have that discussion and with the entire board. And prior to that, I think we'll either send out crib notes or everybody will send out the entire legislation, proposed regulations on that so people can review it. I know several board members have requested it. I think it's already been sent to all board members as well. So we'll have that discussion probably March 1st.
Yes.
And then March 15th, we will reconvene on 133 Essex Street with to answer the questions that the board members will be submitting over that period of time. And we will have all the engineers for the applicant and our peer review team to answer those questions and discuss any remaining outstanding issues.
Yeah, to that point, we made the commitment of having our questions to both sets of engineers, our peer reviewers, as well as the applicants, geotech hydrologist people. So I would ask the board if you do have questions in that arena that didn't get answered or that got spurred, that you know, to your collective curiosities, put those into questions, send to me so I can forward those to both of the sets of engineers. So that becomes part of the discussion on March the 15th.
Okay. If nothing else, then we can move on to the minutes, and then off we can go at some reasonable hour.
Before I forget, Harbor Light Community Partners have notified me that They want to be before the ZBA for their 421 Asbury Street 40B project, which is, this board recalls, is a 45 unit project, which the board made some really super constructive design comments and changes with Andrew DeFranzo a number of months ago. So that project will be before the ZBA at their first meeting in April.
And Patrick, I would ask that, according to Harbor Lights, they're on a trajectory to purchase some of the buildings at Gordon Theological Seminary. They can do anything. They're going to have to go before the ZBA for a change of use. I just like to keep that in mind, and when that happens, that you keep an eye out for that and let the board know that when that hearing may occur. It may not be until May or June, but that's going to be the only leverage point this town has in helping shape that project. So that's going to be critical. And they're talking about over 100 units of affordable housing there.
Will do.
Okay, thank you. So, meeting minutes, January 4th, 2022. Any comments? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the January 4th, 2022.
I move that the board approve the January 4th, 2022 minutes.
Okay,
A second.
Us.
all right, and a roll call vote. Richard,
Richard Boroff, aye.
Marnie,
Marty Crouch, aye.
Jonathan,
Jonathan Poor eye.
Corey,
Will you aye?
Bill,
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Emil,
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
and Rick Mitchell, aye. Okay, on to the 9 pages of the January 25th meeting. The I think that's a January meeting. Yes. So, any questions, discussion, etc.? One typo correction on page 6, paragraph 2, sentence 2. Elizabeth Ransom recommended a hydrogeology study of the site encompassing more than the blast plan, not the black plan.
Let's see, page 6.
Other than that, those minutes are excellent.
For January 25th?
Yes.
Correct? Yeah, so you say any comments? I just wanted to, I guess, parrot what you just said, that the multiple pages of transcript that we keep getting for a lot of these weeks of meetings is sometimes as difficult as the 4-hour meetings themselves. And this particular meeting minutes was very, very easy to read, understand, comprehend, recall what happened. I thought it was a decent example of good minutes and what was shared out ultimately, what are required minutes of us, and that, these detailed accounts might be a bit too much. So just putting it out there, this feels like a good example, whereas many of the others have felt like an overly detailed example. An unnecessarily overly detailed example.
All right. So with that, anybody want to make a motion to approve the January 25th meeting minutes?
I'll make an emotion to
Yeah,
approve the
after all.
January 25th minutes.
We have a second.
I have a second.
Okay. Emil,
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Bill,
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Corey,
Corey Beaulieu, aye.
Jonathan,
Jonathan Poor eye.
Arnie,
Marty Crouch, aye.
Richard,
Richard Boroff, aye.
and Rick Mitchell, aye. Okay, February 8th, 2022.
I have a lot of concerns about these meeting minutes, I think, and we just got them recently, so I'd love to have time to review them.
I would agree.
Yeah.
I do have some comments about these the minutes, and I feel badly in making them, but they are they're really not quite up to speed. I found
Why do you feel they're not up to speed, please?
because I found 5 mistakes before I got to the roll call. Okay,
That's not that bad.
5 mistakes before we got to the roll
Not that good.
You mean opening the meeting?
Before the meet, well, in the
Yeah, I get it.
just in the first part here. I mean,
No, I get it.
you know,
I get it.
names misspelled. You know, it was there are serious problems with these minutes.
I think, I mean, that kind of things aside, to shore up my point, is the succinct nature of the 25th ones is what I'm a fan of. And I think that the lengthy writing is where you start to see more trips and whatnot. I can't speak to this opening paragraph issue. I just mean that my advocacy is for fewer pages in the end. And I think fewer pages causes fewer mistakes. And this person said this thing, simple bullets, feel good. To recount what you're pointing out now is not what I'm advocating.
Yeah, I think to the greatest extent possible, brevity is important. Certainly the January 25th meeting minutes are extremely explanatory and detailed and are nice to have. But they certainly exceed their minimum requirements. So there's always a balancing act of providing clear information and brevity. And so February 8th was a brutal meeting. So
February 8th, though, was a very important meeting because
I'm not.
Joe Mann made several commitments that should really be adequately set forth. And, you know, I just got these February 8th minutes, and I really haven't had. I didn't get very far. I got 2 pages in, and
you started drinking scotch just reading the minutes.
No, but Corey, you were talking. You know, you raised a question early on about the blasting plan, but the minutes indicate you were talking about the stormwater management plan. So, I mean, they're just problems with the minutes. So,
okay, so we'll withhold any review of the meeting minutes for February 8th until probably March 1st at the earliest.
right.
Okay, any other comments, questions, concerns of the board?
I have a question. Okay.
Go ahead, Jonathan, please.
I just had a question about the March 1st meeting. It sounds like ideally we're going to be listening to a little more information on Zero Bridge Street. And if we have any additional time, my question is, even if there isn't a public, if the meeting's continued on 133 Essex, is there anything the board wants to talk about process-wise in preparation for next steps on 133 Essex for March 1st?
Well, I don't.
Open question to the board. Yeah.
I think we sort of from my recollection is we were going to have this March 15th meeting to address all the geohydrology, hydrology, blasting, stormwater management questions, and then go on to findings.
Yeah.
After that meeting, I think that meeting is going to be so, detailed.
So an example of a question for board consideration would be, would it be at all worthwhile sort of looking back at our checklist, looking at the format, revisiting the bylaws to see how we'd like to structure the discussion around findings. That's all. Not to do findings, but to talk about, how we would structure the meeting around that. That's all. Open question for the board.
Then second to that, the question I have is, like, are we a single vote for approval or not approval, or is there a layered vote? What is the, like, we're all done, here we go, tonight's the night. What is the stop? Or what are the steps through that? Is it just a yay or nay one time go, or do we have to approve layers of this project?
Well, the way it typically goes is we will finish the applicant's presentation of all the data that's required by the bylaw or bylaws, and any peer review comments, so that we have a complete submission of information. And then, based on what we talked about, is we would then look at, do we think that have we gotten all our questions answered based on the checklist that we developed about 3 months ago, and then move on to, so that's really the process. We go through a checklist and understand, have we gotten all the documents? Have we gotten answers? Are there any other questions that we need answers before we actually go to the decision? Then we develop findings, which is really a recitation.
It's a justification of what we're going to vote for, basically.
Right, is
Or
here's,
against.
yeah, I think that's probably,
I
Go
think we
ahead.
need to discuss the purposes too.
right. No, I mean, that goes with the checklist, because that we go through section by section of the bylaw on that checklist based on that original checklist. So then, assuming we've got all the information, then we go to justify our decision. What are the findings? And that's going to be probably a very detailed discussion. Does that capture it, Patrick?
Yes, sir. I would also mention to the board that I will have town council present at our 133 Essex meetings from now on. I think, she should be useful to the board. There are a lot of questions that come up in terms of process, protocol, subject matter, et cetera, that I think that she'll be very helpful to the board on.
Can I ask a question, Patrick?
Sure.
Is the applicant, can the applicant sue or appeal our decision? Is there,
Yes, the answer is
not-
yes.
It has, it does happen. If they see that they have a case, if they, think that the decision was made improperly, if there's a difference of opinion in substance, submission, process, procedure, et cetera, sure, there's a potential that they could.
Well, would they sue the board? There's no appellate process in this, so they would sue us, right?
It would-
Sue the town?
Well, it would go to land court.
Land court.
Yeah.
Just like any decision we make, we made a decision about property on Meyer Road that the neighbors didn't agree with, so they took and we voted in favor of the project, and they took that to land court. They're not taking off to land court. They're suing the applicant whose decision whose application we voted in favor of. So it happens all the time.
Okay.
Yeah. And the way that it works is that when the board makes a decision that someone wants to appeal, they do name planning board members collectively as the defendant, I guess you'd say. But the applicant for the project, typically, as was the case with that Meyer Road project, the applicant is the the proponent, so they handle the financial part of that.
And Marty, you're going to serve as the town's lawyer on this case, right?
Well, in conjunction with that, though, I don't bring this up with any glee, but Richard, you did at one point indicate that you would post a retraction on social media of the misstatement you made about the special permit process. And Patrick, you did indicate that at a meeting that you would read that retraction into the record. And I bring it up because not only can the applicant appeal, opponents of the 133 Essex project could appeal as well were it to be approved. So I think that agreement that you made on I don't have the date of that meeting, should be honored, and we should have that retraction as part of our record. And then the other thing, I just to remind everyone, my understanding is that this vote to approve the 133 Essex project or disapprove it, as the case may be, but to actually approve it would require 2/3 of the board members' support, and that would mean 5 votes in favor out of 7. Am I correct on that, Patrick?
Yes, ma'am, you are.
Okay, thank you.
Why is that? Why would it need 2/3 vote, please?
It's a super majority for a special permit.
Okay,
It's
thank
under the zoning act. It's part of the Massachusetts zoning act.
Right.
Thank you.
I'd like to go back to Jonathan's point. It's been interesting to kind of watch the board work, and I get a sense that a lot of us are sort of out there on the perimeter raising issues here and there about various aspects to the project. But I'm wondering whether it would be worthwhile for the board to have this internal discussion so that we could get more familiar with what each other one is thinking. As we go through this process, there are going to be many issues in the findings, I think, that some of us will favor, some of us will not favor them, the reactions to them. And I'm wondering, to what degree do we want to come to a little bit of a consensus as a board, so we speak more as a unit rather than individuals sitting in different corners, especially on these Zoom meetings, we're in different boxes. And
Well, I think that will come out as we discuss the findings. People will state their position. A certain finding will be discussed. Each individual member of the board will have the opportunity to state their opinion on whether the facts support that position or not. So I think that's going to come out as part of the discussion.
Yeah, that's fine. Is the applicant going to be part of that discussion then?
Oh, absolutely. That's part of the hearing process. So, and as the public.
Could we not have a meeting of the board, which is open to the public,
right,
but is not a public hearing?
Right.
And at that meeting,
No,
we can't discuss 133.
No, you cannot discuss that. The decision-making process, and this gets to the appeal and process, is you're skating on very thin ice there.
You have an open public meeting in which we discuss 133.
No,
internally.
It would be a major, the way you're stating it, it would be a major open meeting law violation.
So I think this is a question.
No. I'm not saying it's not an open meeting. It's an open meeting.
Let me just
but it's not a public hearing on 133.
Let me just suggest an approach here. I hear the question, but since have invested 9 months into this, and I want to make sure we're really being very careful about what we are doing and what we're not doing.
That's why I asked the question.
No, I get it. So I'm going to answer that. So as Patrick indicated, Robin Stein, was that her last name?
Yes, it is.
Robin Stein of KPL Law.
KP Law.
KP Law. I'd like her to be, she's going to be at our next meeting and we can raise this issue and have that question answered, because we're now getting into the decision phase and I don't want to do something that's going to prejudice this one way or the other.
Right.
And I think that's the safest way to do this. And we can all ask those questions and all hear the same answer and proceed accordingly.
I think Bill's question, and correct me, Bill, if I'm wrong, is can the board have its discussion without interruption from the applicants or the opponents? I mean, at some
That's right,
point,
that's right. That's exactly
yeah, at
right.
some point,
They
they'll
can
make
listen,
their
they can
pitch.
listen in, but they don't have a right to.
Oh yeah, I think
That's right.
Just us.
I think we can. I think
That
we
was the
can.
point. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
I
what I was
think
trying to make.
I
There
think
we
becomes
understand
a point. There becomes a point where the board will decide to close the hearing,
Right.
and then the board, takes no more public or takes no more information from any of the sides. The board then deliberates on the submitted information that they have,
Right.
and there's nothing more to be submitted. And then through that process, the board makes its decision that it renders to be, what, leads to the vote.
Right.
Okay.
right.
You guys use the word findings quite a bit. I just wanted to add, so there's also conditions, right?
Right.
Do the findings and conditions kind of go in parallel, or does one happen before the other? Or are they used as the same? Does it actually mean conditions as well?
They are different animals,
Yeah.
different instruments that you build into the decision.
Uh-huh.
Findings are often, opinions of the board that somewhat tweak an item that the zoning bylaw has made as a hard and fast rule. But because the board is the special permit granting authority, the board has the potential and authority to be able to create a finding that allows it to accept, circumstances that may be better or may be different than what that specific, regulatory item might have been.
Understood. Yeah. Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
And then the conditions are specific to the project that you say you will do X, Y, and Z as part of the approval process.
Right.
Yeah, they come about.
Like one of the things I keep mentioning is we need to make sure they create and provide for us a construction management plan. You make that a condition.
That's right.
Yeah, and so that's an example. So we don't want to talk about any more details of that,
No.
just because then we're getting into specifics. But that's an example.
Helpful. Thank you.
All right. So unless there are any other questions, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
I had one question. It's a quick one. But when does the governor's allowance for remote meetings, does that expire sometime soon?
Wait a minute, what?
I think remote meetings are only allowed for a certain period of time before that ruling expires unless they extend it. Is that coming up soon?
I will find out and get back to you. I'm not sure.
I think it's the end of the month. I think it's the end of February.
It might be because indoor masks are becoming voluntary now too.
Yeah.
At some point very soon.
It might be a consideration for our next meetings to figure out.
Yeah, and the other question, Patrick, to ask is it board specific? In other words, can the board make that decision?
Right now, the boards make decisions on their own. I can tell you that some of the are the majority of the select board meetings are actually now held in the memorial room.
Live, in person?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Sometimes members are, remote. So they end up being hybrid meetings to accommodate people's schedules. But I know they're trying to make those meetings in person.
Okay. Oh, yeah, that, go ahead.
Yeah, I had one other question, if you will, and that is as you may know, I'm chair of the Affordable Housing Trust, and at present we have some potential projects in the pipeline, but nothing that is occupying us at this time. So it occurred to me that if the planning board was amenable, I could request that the members of the Affordable Housing Trust take a look at the inclusionary housing bylaw, which generated 2 letters from town council with respect to how it should be interpreted. And so I thought that the Affordable Housing Trust members could survey inclusionary housing bylaws from towns of similar size and attempt to draft language that was not ambiguous and more clearly set forth what I think the intent of that bylaw is. And then at some point we could present that draft, or I could present that draft, or the Affordable Housing Trust can present the draft to the planning board for its consideration and any amendments to it. So I don't know if we would have to vote on that to authorize the Affordable Housing Trust to propose a draft of the inclusionary housing bylaw or not, or whether it's just something we could do when you could, and the planning board can consider it or not, as the case may be.
Marty mentioned this to me earlier, and I gave her my wholehearted endorsement. I think that would be wonderful for the Affordable Housing Trust to take a look at that and come back to the board with a recommendation for our consideration. Anybody who wants to do extra work, I'm all for it.
I think it's a good idea.
As I said to Rick, as a former bankruptcy attorney, one of the things we always said was, when someone wants to give you money, take it.
Right.
Oh, are you offering money too?
No, but work. And of course, we'll have to see how enthusiastic the members of the Affordable Housing Trust are about this project. But the other thing I can say is we're looking for members for the Affordable Housing Trust. So if you can prey upon any of your friends and twist their arms, which is how I ended on that board, you might do so, because we could use another member.
Okay, so you've got
Barney,
one vac-
how many housing units do we need to get out from underneath the?
We need approximately 194 from the housing production plan. I think we lost a couple over in Ricker Court. They didn't have
right.
restrictions in perpetuity, so we lost a few. We gained a few. We'll get 10 more. No, actually,
18.
the Habitat project is not a 40B. So we'll get 18 from Willow Street eventually, and we'll get 10 from the Habitat project on Asbury, but the exact time when we get that is unclear. But we still need a considerable number, regardless of how.
No, well, I'm interested in whether or not the 45 off of Asbury, if they come, once
that
they
won't
get.
do the trick.
No,
That'll,
but will that do the trick with the unit at Gordon Conwell?
Well, that's.
Yeah, I understand that's not a
yeah,
done
if
deal.
Gordon Conwell were to go through, in summer, we would be making substantial progress. And if you do get a certain percentage in any given year, it does give you a safe harbor from 40B projects. But right now, I think the Asbury project is it may take a while before the ZBA, but Andrew DeFranza indicated to the members of the Affordable Housing Trust at our last meeting that it would be years before he got the financing together for that project. And as the chair of the Affordable Housing Trust, I could not recommend that we would give Harbor Light any funds until it had solid commitments from the Commonwealth and other resources so that that project could go forward. And Andrew surmised that project on Asbury Street would cost probably north of $20 million. So that's a big project. It's ambitious, and the financing is not certain. And so it's down the road. And I say that with full disclosure, because I, as a member of the Affordable Housing Trust, you should know, what is before us. And the short answer is nothing. I mean, we don't have.
What's the total number of units that a community that we need as a community? Total
10%, 10% of your housing stock.
Okay, so what number is that in real numbers, not percentages, for this
Well,
community?
as I said, we need approximately, and don't hold me to this, it could be 190, 194, 194 additional units.
Total, no. What's the total number, not additional units?
It's a percentage of the existing housing.
Patrick,
stock.
how many housing units are there in Hamilton? 4,000, something like that?
No, I think they're 2,400.
2,400?
Yeah, that's about right.
So we need 240.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we have
that's the
some,
number.
obviously. We it's not like we don't have any affordable housing in town. We do.
Right, we have.
That's
some.
not the
We have
question.
3%.
Say that, Patrick?
We have 3% currently.
Okay,
So we need another 7%, which is 140 units.
Yep.
Well, maybe 107, yeah, very close to what Marnie said. Yeah, okay.
that's fine.
So yeah,
Okay.
there are lots of
I-
issues and
Make a
again,
motion, we
Lloyd
adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
Okay, can we have a second?
I second.
All right, I'm going to ask you to all raise your hands rather than doing a roll call. All those in
Yay.
favor of adjourning? All right, I see there's unanimous. Everybody's voted to adjourn. Have a great rest of the week and weekend, and we'll see you March 1st. Good
Thank
night,
you.
everybody.
Good night.